Hi everyone, thank you for joining. Today we have Rachel Grubbs. She's an independent higher education advisor, writing coach, and essay editor specializing in admissions to medical and other health professional schools. She is a co-founder of MAP, the free pre-med planning platform, and has over 20 years of experience helping students achieve their academic and career goals. Rachel has advised students through the Princeton Review, Next Steps Test Prep, now called Blueprints MCAS, and MAP, also medical school headquarters, and now works independently as a founder and advisor at Polaris Results. She assists students with all aspects of that application process, including personal statements, experiences, and secondary essays, interviews, navigating waitlist and acceptances, as well as early pre-med planning, including course selection and experience development. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, everyone, for having me here and for showing up on a Friday evening. I really appreciate your valuable time. I'm excited that this is going out on YouTube for anyone who can't make it live. I'm going to turn on screen share here. And then let me just get into present mode. I didn't have it on present before, so I could see the people I was chit-chatting with before. We'll get there. I'm not a boomer. All right, hopefully that gets you a nice big picture of our slides. Our session tonight is called From Day One to MD, just because that's nice and catchy. I would like to say for the record that this could also be From Day One to DO. I'm a big fan of both. But since the lion's share of med schools in America are MD, you will find me using that for as shorthand, but definitely inclusion of both. And there's so much that is part of the pre-med process. So I have a lot of slides tonight. I'm going to try to go through them quickly, trusting in your critical reasoning skills to extrapolate and read, even if I'm not reading out loud, every bit of the slide, so that we can get to some questions and answers at the end. Um, and
And
really,
before you message us, yes, we will post the slides at the end on our website.
thank you, Jubin. Yeah. Oh, wait, did I just say your name correctly? Jubin?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. But so yeah, tonight is how to start your pre-med path with confidence and strategy. That is our goal. Um, Stephen already gave me a great introduction, so we'll skip over this. I've been doing this for 20 years. I love pre-meds. Maybe that sounds like pandering, but I used to do uh, college, grad school, law, med. I still do some pre-health. I'm going to be honest, you guys are my favorite. So this is my niche. I have a wide expertise, but this is the one where I have the most fun. Um, I want to start not really with a quiz, but maybe a little poll. Just wondering, I don't know if you guys can type in chat, but if we define traditional as 4 years of college and straight to med school, what percentage of med students do you think are traditional right now? What would be an what would be a percentage of students that do I graduate from high school, I do 4 years of post-secondary education, and then I go on to med school? What are some guesses? Okay, thank you for those of you who are typing in. I can see 20%, 23 to 38, 20, 60, 80. Okay, we've got a wide range here. Some of you are surprisingly close. I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. Dun, dun, dun. It's 26%. So 26% of Med 1s are what has historically been considered traditional. I would like to argue that the definition of traditional is evolving, and I'll show you some more data here. So this is from the AAMC. You may know every year they do a matriculant survey of recent Med 1s. So currently they're surveying people who started med school like 6 or 8 weeks ago. So the data I'm posting here is from the 2024 survey. So these are students who were Med 1s last summer, last fall. Now they're Med 2s. It is a voluntary survey. Most years they get around 15,000 respondents. So certainly not every Med 1 who went to an AMCAS school, but a pretty sizable percentage. And there's all kinds of interesting data in there. If you're spreadsheet geek like me, it's free public data. I definitely recommend checking it out. But this is one of my favorite facts, especially because I've been looking at this survey annually for a large number of years. And that big red, where you see students who report, the question is, they're asking this essentially in like August or September of Med 1, and they say, how many years have passed between your college graduation and starting Med 1? And as of last year, just under 26%, 25.7% students reported less than 1 year. So they probably graduated in May or June, maybe the December before. And about half, 49.6%, reported that it was 1 to 2 years. And this is a number that's relatively stable, but the less than 1 keeps getting slightly smaller. I think the first time I looked, it was about 30%. That was maybe 6 years ago. So I really consider someone who takes 1 or 2 gap years, in my mind, that is still traditional. Not everyone sees it that way. And you can see a quarter of Med 1s last year took 3 or 4 or even 5 or more years. But so the reason I mention this at the front is tonight, one of the things we advertised was a semester by semester example of what a timeline is going to look like. And we're going to do that at the end because I want to talk about all of the pieces and then we'll get into how you put them together. But I want to say at the outset that I think a 5-year timeline is great. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's normal. And I personally think it makes more sense. So, oops, make that quiz go away for me. This is what a 4-year timeline would look like. So I am kind of pushing for a 5-year, but I know a lot of people want to aim for 4 years, and it's your choice. My guess is we've got a mix of first year, second year, third years here. Not everybody is a nice, neat, tidy freshman, sophomore, junior. Credits don't work like that. Life doesn't work like that. But for the sake of simplicity, if you are a freshman right now and you're planning to graduate in May or June of 2029 and start med school right after, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that med school application process, if you count like taking the MCAT and working on your essays that winter and spring before you apply, you're applying May of your junior year. So that gives you just about 2.5 years to take all your courses and get all your activities and develop yourself personally and professionally to the point where you feel ready to apply. Because although you will continue, of course, to take courses and get clinical experience and develop yourself as a human, the med schools are going to be looking at you based on what you're submitting in May or June of your junior year on a 4-year timeline. That's not a lot of time to put everything together, especially currently. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. When I went to college in the 90s, 4 years was very common because, to be frank, the list of courses you had to take was not as long and the expectations on activities were not as robust, right? So it used to be possible. It's still possible, but not as much. So what I would like to at least invite you to consider is a 5-year timeline, where then you have 3.5 years to work on courses and activities. You're actually taking the MCAT and applying your senior year. And then your so-called gap year that a lot of people talk about is like, oh, that's when I can get all my clinical. Well, you certainly can and should be getting clinical your gap year, but med schools are assessing you based on what happens when you apply. So it gives you 1 extra year, but you're still applying senior year in this timeline. And of course, you can extrapolate if you need 6 or more years, but I wanted to kind of show this diagram to kind of help you visualize what the next few years look like and how, again, I'll be giving an example, detailed timeline at the end. I'm going to trust that you guys can use your big, beautiful brains. Sorry, I should have said humans. You humans can use your big, beautiful brains to extrapolate up or down as you see fit for your own life. So, pre-med process, I'm going to guess that everybody in this room knows that GPA matters and MCAT matters. What I often find students forget is that all these other things you see on the screen also matter, right? So not just your GPA, but which courses you're taking and how you're doing in some of them specifically, the prereqs that are required, the science GPA focus. There is additional standardized exams outside of the MCAT, the situational judgment tests. We won't talk a lot about them tonight, but I mention them here because they assess professional development skills. And if all you do in college is college, you are probably missing out on a chance to develop them. So in addition to GPA, MCAT, you take these situational judgment tests. You typically do that the spring of the year you apply. You'll need letters of evaluation from a mix of professors and professional contacts. You're going to need patient care, which is often called clinical. You're going to need community service. I use that word deliberately instead of volunteering. We'll get back to why. You're going to need some shadowing. You may or may not need research. It's on the board because a lot of people want to know about it. We'll get into why it's a may or may not later. And then you may have other activities that you do simply because you have to. Maybe you have a job because you need the money. Maybe you have passions you follow because you just can't imagine life without them. Those are great. That's part of the pre-med process. And hopefully what you're doing through all of these things, if we're kind of following this circle, is developing some competencies. So I want to talk about those again for a minute because I find that typically when I show people this list, the competencies is the piece that they're least familiar with. So this is something you can Google. I'm giving a very simplified version with just the headers here, but if you go to the AAMC, if you just Google AAMC competencies, there's a very detailed list. There are 3 sections of competencies. So here are 2 of the sections. One is science competencies, the other is thinking, reasoning. And so science competencies basically can be assessed by your GPA in science courses and by your MCAT score, right? So that's a very quantifiable thing we can measure. Thinking and reasoning competencies, critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, scientific inquiry. Again, a lot of that is MCAT. Written communication. Do you guys know the main way you're getting measured for written communication when you apply to med school? You can type in the chat if you know. Oh, I've lost the chat though, so I'll have to figure out where I put it. So did anybody say essays? Oh, there's the chat. Yeah, you are going to write about 20 or so essays when you apply through primary applications. And then assuming you apply to 20 or 30 med schools, which is an expensive endeavor, but is pretty normal, you will write another 100 to 150 secondaries. So I stress written communication because that is the main way you convey yourself to med schools is in writing. So that is a competency that is going to matter a lot for you in the next several years. And then here are professional competencies. So this is the 3rd category. If you're wondering why some are red and some are black, it's because these came out about 15 years ago, and about 2 years ago, there was an update. So for anyone who looked at an older list, the red ones are the slightly updated ones from 2023. I'm not going to read you all of them. You guys know how to read, and you're going to see this deck again later. But again, if you can see here, there's a lot of stuff about ethics and cultural awareness and interpersonal skills and adaptability. And they're called professional competencies for a reason. There are lots of ways you can pick these up, you know, from life, from blended families, from church, from travel. But the truth is, most of us develop a lot of these from having a job, right? So just showing up to the daily grind and interacting with humans in whatever job it is, whether it's at a restaurant or a hospital, is going to help you develop a lot of these skills. And this is a very hard thing to measure. And the main way you get to showcase these skills is through those essays you write. So, you know, for the next several years, a lot of your focus is just going to be on doing stuff. You can't really go out and be like, today I will develop my ethical responsibility to self and others. It doesn't really work like that. But I think it's helpful for you to know, right? Like, I've been a teacher in a classroom before, and of course have been a student for a lot of my life. I like to know what I'm being graded on, right? I want a syllabus up front that says, hey, at the end of the term, this is what we're measuring you on. This is me giving you that. Med schools are going to be looking for these things in addition to those simple numbers of GPA and MCAT. So, it's not a checkbox thing, but I think it's helpful for you to know you're going out and doing things for yourself. And part of what you're doing is trying to be mindful that as you transition from college going adult to med school attending adult, they will be looking at you as not just a future student, but a future hospital employee. And they want to know that you have the capacity to represent the med school well when you are in rotations, when you're in clerkships. Okay, so I'm going to start to break this down into chunks. As I mentioned, I'm going to give you kind of all of the pieces, and then towards the end of the session, we'll talk about timeline. I am a chatty Cassie. I'm going to try to be really mindful of the clock because I do want to leave room for Q&A, but there's just a lot of pieces to this. So with coursework, you hear a lot of talks about prereqs. I have specifically spelled out prerequisite because I want to make sure you're seeing the requisite means required. Not all med schools have the same required coursework, but many of them have a lot in common. And what you can typically expect is a year of bio, 2 years of chemistry, or really 2.5 if you count biochem, physics, a year of English/writing intensive courses. Hey, writing came up again. And a year of math. I've written a year of calculus because there are a few schools that want to see 2 semesters of calculus. Some of them want to see 1 semester of calc and 1 semester of stats. But I'm telling you a year now so you can play it safe. And also because sometimes even if the med school doesn't want to see a year, your major requires it. And then not as often required, but frequently recommended or required are psychology and sociology. Biochem's always a must. That is a huge part of MCAT prep and success in med schools, having a strong biochem foundation, and then some kind of statistics class. So those are required courses for all pre-meds, regardless of your major. And then there is a wide variety of recommended coursework. I don't want you to look at this list and take away, I have to take all these things that Rachel has written. That's not my point. My point is that many schools recommend some upper level bio, and I've given you a list of some examples. And many schools recommend some other electives that they think will help develop you. Abnormal psych, med ethics, philosophy, epidemiology. I hope you can see that obviously the trend on the right is more upper, or the trend on the left is more upper level bio. The trend on the right is often things that are about your ability to critically problem solve or understand the world a little bit better. This is going to vary school to school, and it's recommended. So if a school recommends a semester for philosophy and you don't have it, that doesn't mean you can't apply. Double negatives are bad. You can still apply. Unlike with a requirement, where really if you're missing it, like they don't take requirements lightly, right? So you either have to have taken it and gotten that great grade or have it on your to take list before you matriculate. But these recommended courses can help develop your skills, and sometimes those recommendations show you what kind of things matter to specific schools. So if at this stage in your pre-med process you already have a couple dream schools, you may not know all 20 or 30 that you want to apply to. That's fine. It's early. But you may want to go look at your top, maybe the public school in your state that you're most excited about, or if there's a dream school you've been thinking about for years, at least go see what they recommend and see if you can fit that into your curriculum. All right. So this is where things get complicated. And I have worked with a decent amount of community college students over the years. And I know that this is a group that is, it's called PreMedCC. Everyone's welcome. So I'm guessing we've got a mix of community college attendees and not. And I did some follow-up with some of my my students who did community college before transferring to a 4-year to kind of ask them, hey, what specific pain points did you have as part of your pre-med process? And one of the big things they mentioned as a trend, you know, as I talked to several students, was being sure they knew exactly which courses they were supposed to take for their major when they were still the second year, in their first 2 years and hadn't transferred yet, knowing exactly which courses would transfer, knowing exactly which general education courses they needed to fit in to graduate on whatever schedule. So I can't do all of that for you for every use case of every major and every school and every transfer. But what I want to remind you is that that data is out there and you need to get it firsthand, right? I am not an anti-AI person, but this is not the kind of stuff you should be asking AI. You should be talking to your advisor at your school. If you know where you want to transfer, you should be looking at the school that you want to transfer to and checking their data against what you're getting at your community college. This is something you want to make sure you're getting right and fitting in, because everything I gave you is just about being a pre-med, and pre-med is not a major, right? So make sure you're layering your own plan on top of your pre-med plan. All right. So we had promised in this session that we would talk about pitfalls to avoid. I'm trying to always hit kind of the most common ones I see over the years. And number one is understanding that even if your college or university says a C minus or a D as a pass, med schools do not say that for prereqs. So you need at least a C or higher to have considered a fulfilled a prerequisite course. And med schools do not have grade replacement. So there's no shame in the occasional bad grade, right? My sister, I think she's okay with me telling this story publicly. When she took Orgo 1, she got a D. And then she took it again and got an A, right? Both grades were on her pharmacy application. That's the way it works for pharmacy school and med school, right? So you just need to be aware that even if you're lucky enough to have grade forgiveness or grade replacement on your college transcript, that's not how it's going to be on your AMCAS and ACOMAS transcripts. And then the other big pitfall is disregarding humanities. I've already mentioned writing skills and essays a few times. A reading, writing, critical reasoning skill, that's a muscle just like your science and math skills. And it's something you have to use to keep it in good shape. So sometimes when I talk to pre-meds, they'll tell me all the science courses they're taking this semester and then go, oh, everything else is easy. I'm like, okay, but do you mean easy like I could probably go to class and take notes and get an A? Because that's fine if that's the case, if you've got that kind of brain. But also, are you using that course as a chance to build your reading and writing skills? Because that's your chance to exercise that muscle. So those are the three big pitfalls I see with coursework. Letters of recommendation. So why am I talking about letters of recommendation right now when all we've done is talk about coursework and we're nowhere near application year? Anyone in the chat have a guess? Oh, it's quiet. So the typical med school is going to look, Brian, Demaris, Noel, thank you. Ilya, okay, everyone's getting it. Awesome. The typical med school is looking for 3 to 5 letters of rec. Again, it varies by school, so this is not a master list. It's a general rule of thumb. But yeah, typically you're looking for 2 science professors. And so I don't know what schools you guys, all of you go to, but I went to Ohio State. My calculus lectures, I don't know, had 200 people. My Gen Chem had 500. It was not easy to connect with my professors, right? I had to work to build relationships with them. There were office hours, and sometimes I would be lucky and there would be no one there. And sometimes there would be a line out the door. So you can't really chit chat or get to know them when you know there's 10 people behind you. So I understand this is a lot of work, right? But what I want to encourage you to do, especially if you're at a community college where maybe you're lucky enough to have smaller class size, is really think about how you can connect with your professors. Um, and again, sometimes it's science professors, but sometimes they want non-science professors. If you do research, which we'll talk about later, they often want a letter from the principal investigator, often a worker volunteer supervisor. So you want to be thinking about, as many of you have correctly typed in, building those relationships now. When I was in my early 20s and people told me I had to network, I didn't know what it meant, and it felt insincere to me. I thought, well, they don't really have any need for me, so then I'm just bugging them. So how do I do this? And I will say networking gets a lot easier as you age, because a lot of networking is just being nice and staying in touch, and so time helps a lot. But I do think it is perfectly acceptable to honestly tell a professor, hey, I'm pre-med, and in a couple years I'll be looking for letters of rec, and I'm hoping that by then you feel like you know me well enough that you can write one. Right? You're not asking them to write the letter your freshman year or your first year. Just being honest about what your intentions are. I think personally that's better, because then you just get it out. And then the other thing is you can think about how you can help them, right? If you ace the class, do they need TAs or help with grading? Does the professor do research that interests you? Because you can ask about that research and maybe even see if you can help in the lab. So you're not only building the relationship, but you're getting other opportunities. Uh, uh, I personally think, and this is someone who's both taught and I was raised by educators, I've taught in a classroom, I've been a student. A big part of connecting with professors is showing up to class and making eye contact. So whether that's on Zoom or in person, um, they notice who's locked in. They are aware of maybe not the whole room if it's a big lecture hall, but at least the first few rows. Put yourself there, right? Be aware. That makes a big difference. What you don't necessarily need with a letter of rec is an A, right? Because it's great if you got an A in that course, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know you well. And in fact, some of the best letters I've ever seen are for students who had D's on their first exam and then pulled out a B or a B plus by the end of the term. And so the professor can speak to how hard this person worked to eventually succeed. So I've kind of already talked about pitfalls here, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but yeah, um, you don't want to wait, and you don't want to wait and ask for the first time when you apply if you haven't talked to this person in 3 years, right? So uh, you want to be staying in touch. I think that's easier to do with PIs and work supervisors, but with professors, I think it's a lot of work. So a lot of my focus here is just about how to navigate that classroom situation with something that feels authentic. Okay, so standardized exams. I mentioned before that everybody knows the biggie is the MCAT. The number one mistake I see with MCAT prep is not allowing enough time. I see a lot of people try to do it in 2 months or 3 months when they usually need 3 or 4 if they are making prep one of the biggest occupations of their time. And if you have school and work, which you might, because I'm going to recommend that you're busy, that you're doing things like clinical and research and shadowing. If you've got family that needs you, you may need 5 or 6 months of a less rigorous schedule. And what I see over and over is people think they're going to take the MCAT in March or April of the year they're going to apply. They don't feel ready, so they push it back to June or July. And then you're in an uncomfortable position of not applying very early in the cycle and also not knowing what your score is until well after the time I will have wanted you to choose your application list. I don't think the MCAT score fully feeds a school list. I don't think it works that simply. But if you're hoping for at least a 505 and it comes in at 494, that may change whether or not you even apply, right? So what I recommend is that you aim to take the MCAT January of the year you apply. This year, as you guys may know, hopefully a bunch of you who are taking the MCAT this year just signed up for it a couple days ago. This is the first year we're going to have a February test date, so I would say Jan or Feb is fine. with kind of thinking about, well, if I'm not ready, then I still have March or April, meaning even if you take it in April, you still get scores back in May, meaning that when the applications open in late May that year, you have a score in hand. Can you do it later? Yes, we could navigate all the different dates a million times, but this is what I recommend. And then I've talked a lot about writing, reasoning skills. The AAMC themselves have said that the exam is 40% content and 60% critical thinking. So when we're talking about important ways to prepare for the MCAT, a huge part of it is going to be reading the passages, reading the questions, navigating the confusing answer choices. So pitfalls to avoid. A lot of people don't want to take a baseline diagnostic. I don't know. I don't think we mentioned this in my introduction, but I actually started in test prep. So I was doing SAT, ACT, LSAT, MCAT before I evolved into doing graduate and med admissions. And the number one mistake I've seen my whole career is people saying, well, I'm not ready to take a diagnostic. I haven't done content review yet. Boo, you're not getting it. It is both a content and a reasoning exam. And the idea is take a half length, rip the Band-Aid, find out what the test feels like, find out what the passages are like, and then jump into a mix of content review and practice. And then what the other big mistake I see is students who take one or maybe two tests. Maybe they don't even take them in a full length situation. I'm not saying these things lightly. Being able to sit down and have, you know, a 7-hour practice test experience multiple times. I understand that's a huge investment of time. It requires resources to be able to, you know, do all of that in one sitting. But the MCAT is a marathon and a physical exam as well as a mental exam. And you will probably score within a couple points of how you're scoring on your practice tests. So you need to take several full-length exams under testing conditions as much like the real thing as possible. And these are these are basic things that many people fail to do. And so they're easy pitfalls to avoid. I'm not saying it's easy to do the things. I'm just saying if you've only taken one practice test and it was a month ago, no, you're not ready to take the MCAT. It's simple, right? So pitfalls to avoid here. And then I'm not going to talk a lot about situational judgment tests today, but I want to at least mention them because I do typically recommend that you take them in May or June of your application year. And again, a common mistake that people make is taking them in August or September, which is not the end of the world, but can slow down your application processing. These take a fraction of the preparation of an MCAT, right? MCAT is months. Most people who prep for the Casper preview that I work with maybe spend a couple hours each, right? This is not the same kind of investment. They're not really meant to be coachable tests because they're assessing your professional competencies. But part of why I'm mentioning them is when we looked at that competency list, I'm not saying it's perfect, but what the med schools are trying to do with these exams is get some sense of those competencies. I don't think the system is perfect. I mean, I know some of the people who have created these exams. I think they're doing it in good faith. I just don't think all the kinks are worked out, but that's part of what these tests are supposed to do. So just being aware that you are going to have kind of ethics-based, scenario-based testing in addition to your MCAT. They're going to give you questions that are, hey, what if you were in this situation, this ethical situation, what would you do? And that's coming your way. And this is part of the development that we do over our pre-med process is work on putting ourselves in real situations like that. So we have real life experience to draw on. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water here as we pause on the activities head page. So, I've got this picture here of this baby and then the big no sign on the baby. Am I saying I hate babies? No, that baby's pretty adorable. But one of the common things I hear when I talk to students, especially at the personal statement phase, is I'll ask them, hey, why do you want to be a physician? Or what do you remember about deciding to become a physician? And one of the most common answers I get is, I've wanted to be one my whole life. I've always known I'm going to be a doctor. And respectfully, I think if you can't remember a time pre I'm going to be a doctor, it might not have been your idea, right? That baby looks super cute in those scrubs. That baby does not want to be a doctor. That baby's parents wanted to be a doctor. And there's nothing wrong with your parents wanting you to be a doctor. That does not negate your own volition. But what I want to know is about your journey, right? So even if, since you were 3, I mean, I have a friend who, when her baby, well, toddler, was in the tub, she would like spell out the names of med schools with the alphabet letters that they played with in the tub. Like she was conditioning that 3-year-old to be a pre-med, and I mean, whatever, it's her child, it's her choice. But ultimately, and by the way, that young woman's in high school now, so I don't know if she's going to be a doctor or not, but she's still got some life to live. But that part is not interesting to me. What I want to know is about how you explored it, how you came to your own conclusion. And so that's a part of the reason I'm mentioning that now is, to me, that's the purpose in these activities, is you're giving yourself a chance to follow your passions. If you are pre-med, I hope some of your passions are healthcare related, but also I want you to follow some passions that aren't healthcare related just because they're part of who you are as a person. So this winding road, I don't even know if you can see, there's a tiny little dude on a motorcycle there. Well, human, I don't know if that's a dude or not. This is what I think activities are about. It's about the journey. So when you actually apply to med school, the AAMC has 19 different activity categories. Some of these are highly specific. You only actually get to write 15 essays. Well, technically 18, but you pick 15 activities to write about, and then 3 of them get a bonus essay. So you're not even necessarily going to use every single one of these categories. I'm just listing them there so you can see there is a wide range of things that med schools want to hear about. And a common mistake that students make when they write activities essays is only talking about their pre-med selves. But actually, med schools want to know about your whole self, not just your pre-med self. So that is why I'm showing you this full list, so that you can get a sense of the wide range of things that are so common that they have their own category. And then what I think is most important to focus on tonight are what I personally call the big 4. That's not like a scientific official name or anything. It's just kind of my shortcut. When I'm meeting a new student for the first time and they're asking me to help them assess their readiness to apply, what I'm looking at, kind of as a quick shorthand for, I just want to know where you are with your activities, is I always want to hear about their patient care experience. I want to hear about their shadowing. I want to hear about their community service. I want to hear about their research. So those are the things we're going to focus on. So patient care, this is sometimes called clinical experience. The reason I like to say patient care is because I think it is more accurately describes what we need. This is a pretty well-educated bunch of people. You guys come to these sessions, you probably know a lot. Clinical does not have to be in a clinic. You probably know that. So I've listed some different jobs here that are, in my mind, good entry-level clinical experiences. These are not the only ones, but there's a wide range here. Depending on the state you live in, you may have to have a certification, also depending on the job. Med assistants, for example, in some states you can get on the job training. In some states you have to have a certification in advance, just varies. But these are all different ways that you can get clinical experience. And most of these are paid opportunities. A hospice companion can be paid or unpaid usually, but most of these are paid. And that's deliberate, because up until 2020, it was very common for pre-meds to primarily get clinical experience that was volunteer. And the COVID pandemic really changed that. It's very, very hard to get volunteer opportunities compared to what it used to be. And so if you can find a great clinical opportunity that excites you, that is volunteer and you want to do it, that's super. But you may find that that's not actually available to you. And so it might be that for you to get patient care, that you need to make a commitment to a job to get that experience. So big pitfalls to avoid when we're looking at clinical: training hours do not count. Lots of people will tell me, oh, I'm a certified EMT. I'm like, oh, that's great. So where are you doing your EMT work? Well, I'm not. But it was a 200-hour course and 100 hours of it was with patients, so I can list that, right? Nope. Med schools are not interested in your training. They may understand that you need it in order to get the actual experience, but training hours do not count as clinical hours. Similarly, titles do not matter. One of the classic mistakes I get is, well, I was a clinical researcher, so I have clinical, right? And then when I talk to them about what they did, their clinical research might be huge amounts of data analysis, which is super cool and important, but sitting at a computer is not patient exposure. Sometimes a clinical researcher primarily cleans lab equipment. Again, that's kind of thankless but important work. So I count that as some important lab work, but that's not clinical, right? So don't go by the title, go by what the day-to-day life is like. And
Just
then
just
go ahead.
know that if you're doing anything clinical, like if you're touching a patient, anything like that, you need to have some sort of certification because the healthcare is highly litigated and litigative. So like, so like be, just say like, oh well, like I was doing clinical work. So what were you doing? Oh, I was just in the ER walking patients to their room and giving them blankets. Well, that's not really, but like if you're an ER tech or if you're working in an office and you're doing billing, that's not clinical. But if you're
Exactly.
like a medical assistant doing blood draws and point of care testing and things like that. So like just be know that and I would just be very like apprehensive and because there's some places you could be a medical assistant without licensing, and I would just be really careful because I would not like put that on there, and that's just a personal thing because then it's like you're doing something that's not legal in your state. So just be really careful if some states you could get away with it, and some offices the physician takes that liability on themselves. But just be really careful, or don't over exaggerate it. Like my favorite thing,
Yeah.
somebody was like, "Yeah, I went to like, a developing country, and I was like doing first assist surgery and stuff like that." And it's just like, well, first of all, like that's unethical. But second, whichever surgeon that let you do that, that's unethical too. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I always tell people is like, would you be okay with um somebody with no experience working on your grandma or on your kid
Right.
or on your loved one? Would you be okay with that?
Hmm.
Just kind of put that into that as well. And so just make sure like clinical requires you to have something, like I think the lowest thing you could do is like 25 hours to get
Hmm.
some sort of certification.
Hmm.
And I think EMT is like 100 and some odd hours. So yeah, just be careful. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely know your state laws, right? I live in Ohio, which is a state where med assistants don't have to have taken a training course. But of course, many of the people who are applying for med assistant jobs did take a training course. So that kind of goes into the third bullet point. So not only are we talking about ethics, but just realistically, why would they take a chance on you when there are all these other qualified candidates who did go through some kind of training?
yeah,
Um, so that the idea of expecting to fall in your lap, and again, I'm not trying to be negative, I'm trying to help you guys avoid pitfalls, but sometimes what I hear is, well, the hospital near my school wasn't taking any volunteers or didn't have any jobs. I'm like, okay, so that was step one. Right, like, what else did you do? Like, looking for a job is a job, right? It's hard work to get a job. It's hard work to build a resume that's compelling, especially when you get a so-called entry-level job and it turns out they want 1 to 2 years of experience and you're going, I don't have that 1 or 2 years of experience. I was hoping to get it with you. I've been there. So you are going to have to knock on some doors and try a lot of different things to get these opportunities.
Yeah, and I could just tell you that if you're doing any of these training programs like EMT, they put you through hours at those clinical sites.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that if you are not a nice person on those things you go or you have these expectations, that's like a really good way of not getting a job at that facility.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and so like, um, I've had people come in and do their rotations and like they don't like follow directions
Hmm.
and don't listen to you and then want to come back and work there or so yeah, so just make sure like you're always at your best behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. Never burn any bridges anywhere. I was talking before about uh, that I found networking to be very challenging when I was young because it felt smarmy to me. And my joke, now that I'm in my 40s, is oh, I figured out that networking is just being really nice and staying in touch. Like it's actually like time and niceness are the two main factors in networking. And so you
it's
guys,
it's easier
maybe
to catch bee with honey than with a sting.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so one of the other things we had promised to talk about in tonight's session is tracking and journaling. And I have a page for journaling for each major activity. I won't spend as much time on them because there's some repetition, but this is the first time I've talked about journaling tonight, so I'm going to spend some time here. So just from a practical, objective standpoint, tracking your clinical hours means knowing your start and end dates, knowing the number of hours you've worked. You can have a spreadsheet where you list every single date, every single shift, or you can just have one line where you just manually add in the hours. It's all self reported, it's all honor system. No one's going to be, well, very unlikely is a med school going to call the hospital and say, let me compare, your payroll to their numbers. Honor system should have passed the reality check though. Um, to be realistic, when you report your hours to med schools, they usually don't have the bandwidth to verify every single one, but you are giving them your contact's phone numbers. And I have known cases where they do verify, especially if the number does not seem realistic. Um, if you work a full time job for 1 year, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, that's about 2,000 hours. If you tell me you did something for 6 months and you have 4,000 hours, I'm going to question it. And so is the med school, right? So just at a basic, just have your supervisor contact info, the organization contact info, so sort of a general contact and your specific supervisor, have the dates and hours. One thing I want to mention about supervisor contact info is in this economic climate, people change jobs commonly every year or two. So maybe don't just get the work email, right? Because it's possible that in 2 years, the work email will be no good, right? See if they'll let you get a phone number to text, or if you can connect with them also on LinkedIn. Try to have some redundancy in that contact. And then the reflection, right? So I'm not just talking about tracking hours. I encourage you to journal about your experiences. And this is, to be candid with you, part of the essay writing process, but these are not essays. So your journaling does not need to be pretty. It doesn't need to be legible to anyone else. It can be bullet points, it can be partial sentences. But what I want you to do is take some time to reflect on your experiences. And so when I tell people, hey, reflect, they often go, I have no idea what that looks like, right? So trying to break it down for you here in some concrete points. One of the cool things that happens with clinical is sometimes you meet patients that really stay in your brain, right? You're on the bus or you're driving home and you're thinking about that patient, that family. That's a good sign that that's somebody who should end up in your journal. Um, Sometimes you just get to learn really cool things, right? See really cool medical or science stuff. That's something you can jot down. I definitely encourage you to think about stuff that challenges your point of view, right? So, um, if you meet someone who's from an affinity group that you've never met before, and maybe you had some assumptions about them, which, by the way, is human. I don't judge people for having biases. I judge people for not recognizing their biases and working on it, right? So if you notice, oh, I'd never met an unhoused person before and I didn't really realize like how much of it is bad luck or foster kids who aged out of the system. You know, I had this like stereotype of that they were a certain kind of person, right? Like those are moments that you can reflect on and jot down. And again, you don't have to have a perfect essay at this stage. What you're doing is writing down the event in any kind of rough, raw thoughts you're having about it. And same with mistakes, right? I think a lot of premeds feel vulnerable about admitting they have mistakes, but this is a private journal. Not every mistake you've made is going to end up in an essay. But one of the most common secondary med school essay questions is, tell me about a time that you made a mistake. So it's a really good idea to get comfortable with thinking about, you are human, you will occasionally screw up. That's fine. Can you reflect on that screw up and what you learned from that experience? So there's lots of things you can journal about, but if you're kind of thinking about these 4 things, that's going to be a really good start. Okay, so shadowing, these will get a little quicker. Clinical is kind of the big in-depth one. Jubin had mentioned before that for hands-on patient care, it's important to have a certification. If you're trying to do shadowing before you have any kind of clinical experience, one of the best things you can do is get HIPAA certified, because one of the main reasons doctors say no to shadowing is because of HIPAA. And that's something you can get usually within a couple hours for a relatively low amount of dollars. Lots and lots of websites have HIPAA certifications, easy to Google. I used to say, ask doctors you know. And what I found is that a lot of people assumed I was talking about family friends and like, well, what if I don't know any doctors? Like, my family doesn't live a life like that. You probably know the doctors who have treated you, right? And even if you didn't have preventive care growing up, right? Not everybody had a regular pediatrician they saw every year, right? Not everyone has an OBGYN, because not everybody has the parts or feels the need, even if they have the parts. But you know, even if you just go to an urgent care because you have a bad flu, right? While you're there, hey, I'm pre-med, right? You can ask the doctors who treat you. They might say no, but you can at least start with them because that's someone you've met in person. Some colleges and universities have excellent systems for helping people get connected with shadowing. Not nearly as many of them do as I would wish, but some do. So definitely check with your school, check with your advisor, check with the local pre-med or pre-health clubs for shadowing opportunities, because you may find some connections that way. And then this might seem backwards because a lot of people think about doing shadowing first and then getting clinical, but I find sometimes the easiest way to get shadowing is to go get your clinical job and then find some physicians at that job and ask them, hey, can I come back when I'm not on the clock and shadow you? And even if you're interacting with physicians a lot at your clinical job, which is not always the case, right? If you're a phlebotomist, you're in a lab, you may never see a doctor. If you're an EMT, sometimes it's a handoff to the physician, but you don't get a lot of time with them. But you may still have the chance to at least make connections with people in the building or people related to your work. But I'm a big fan of doing shadowing even if you have a lot of clinical where you do get to interact with physicians, because I think one of the big benefits of shadowing is seeing the whole day, not just the clinical day. Most most physicians report burnout from admin, not patients. So see some of their admin, right? Some things are getting better. You know, noting used to be a big issue, and AI is making that, you know, transcriptions are so much easier now. Like, noting is becoming easier and easier. But, you know, I still talk to doctors on the regular who spend hours battling insurance. That's part of the job, right? And sometimes you can delegate that to staff, and sometimes it needs to be the physician doing the battling, right? And so I think one of the good things about shadowing, aside from getting to, you know, meet cool people with cool careers and see different specialties, is see some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the job, right? Just be realistic that this is not a perfect dream job, right? It's an exciting, rewarding, challenging, meaningful job, but it's got its warts. See what they are. See how you feel about it. It gives you a realistic view.
The other thing is I just want to add too is if you're on your clinical job, um, they want you to do the job. They don't want you to go shadow doctors or sit around and
Right.
you're there for a purpose and you're getting
Right.
paid for that purpose.
Right.
And that's a good way to get fired if you're
Exactly. Which
not
is
doing
part
it.
of why, oh wait, oh, I meant to go backwards. Oh no. Yeah, it's part of why I said off the clock, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're like working in the, I don't know, in lab, you can't go during your work time in the OR and watch surgeries.
Exactly.
But
Right. But if you're lucky enough to meet a cool doctor who's friendly and always stops by the lab to say hi, you can ask them if you can come shadow a surgery someday that you're not working at the lab. All right. So you're going to see a pattern here with tracking and journaling. So I'm not going to spend as much time. I am chatty. I want to make sure we leave a little bit of space for Q&A. But so again, contact information, hours and dates. And then with shadowing, I think it's a great thing to think about the location type, right? So shadowing an OBGYN who's in the hospital delivering babies is different than shadowing her or him or them in the office doing pap smears, right? Both
It's
are
9
valuable.
o'clock.
But kind of think about that, about where are you, what population you're serving. And then again, patients that have impacted you, interesting cases, uh, qualities you want to emulate, right? You don't want to badmouth physicians. You may see some things where you think, oh, I definitely don't want to do that. But what you can think about is what you do want to emulate. Um, and like I mentioned, insurance and admin is part of the job. So reflect on that too. So community service. I'm deliberately using the word community service, not volunteering, because not all unpaid work is community service, right? Um, if I work for a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills who does primarily cosmetic work, and I say, you know what, you don't have to pay me, I'm just so thrilled to be here. Now, I'm not trying to diss wealthy people or cosmetic surgeries, but that's not super meaningful, right? That's just you giving free time. You're excited to do the work. But when med schools talk about community service, which is again why I'm saying that instead of volunteering, what they're looking at is giving back to the community and ideally someone who has fewer resources than you. And I'm not saying that every pre-med is highly resourced. I'm just saying, thinking about, are there groups of people out there who have fewer advantages than you do that you feel passionate about? Try to go help them. And so this is sort of my pitfalls and pro tips all in one slide. The biggest mistake I see is students who join pre-health clubs and then say, oh, well, we do philanthropy. You know, we always do one day a semester. So I have those events. Yeah, you're not going to really get a lot out of a one-day event usually. I mean, maybe sometimes, right? But a lot of those events are about getting together resources. So a one-day event, you know, where you're at Shower of Hope in Skid Row helping unhoused, you know, have the dignity of hygiene, that's very different than a one-day event where you're sitting with your other college age peers braiding bracelets that then get donated to some kids and you never even see the kids, right? So when I say behind the scenes only, I understand sometimes those are going to be the events you do, but that's not going to be very meaningful for your development or for thinking about the larger world. So what I want you to think about is maybe do some of those one-day events to explore what interests you, but then try to identify, and everyone's got their own personal preferences, is there some group out there that speaks to you? Maybe it's because of something you've lived through yourself, some trauma you've experienced, and you want to give back to that group. Maybe it's, refugees from a certain country where a lot of people in your city have recently come here. It's going to vary, but I want you to think about some group that interests you, that your heart goes out to, and then try to break out of your own bubble and engage with those people directly. There's a big difference between, well, I coordinated with my other pre-meds and we got a bunch of cans and we dropped them off at a food bank, which is great, right? That's great work. But all you really got out of that was how to coordinate college age students and gather resources. Good skills, not really about engaging with the community, right? So that's what I want you to think about when you're looking for a community service activity is, maybe again, you're doing some one days to explore, but look for something that you can really sink your teeth into and do regularly over time.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put this out there too. And last time I mentioned this, I got a lot of hate mail.
Ooh,
Um, if you are the person that goes once a year and volunteers on Thanksgiving to feed the homeless for 3 hours, that's great. Don't put that on your one of your 15 activities
I agree.
because that's not
Waste
like
of
so.
space.
But let's say you spend 3 months or 4 months to prepare to feed the people and getting the equipment, getting all the food, prepping, coordinating shifts, all those different things. That's a very different thing than showing up for 3 hours and feeding the homeless. Not that it's a
100%.
bad thing, but it's just like, you know, probably without you showing up for 3 hours, the homeless would have been fed.
Yep.
But if you say, okay, you were in charge of the cooking or, all of those different coordinations that you had to do, that's very different.
Yep. 100% agree with you. Yes. Yeah. And again, think about the fact, because sometimes I think, and maybe I should have listed this as like a bullet point. It's not the optics, right? If someone says to you, it'll look good on your resume, that is a red flag that it's probably not the right activity for you. Because you're not submitting a bullet point resume to the med school. You're submitting 15 activities, and those are precious, right? You only get 15 for AMCAS. So each one of them needs to really have some emotional substance behind it. And again, 1 3 hour shift just probably doesn't have it. So yeah, I'm completely with you on that. And then again, journaling, you're going to see a pattern here, so I can go a little quicker. But with community service, I want you to think about who the population you served is, what problem you're trying to solve, and issues that are both inside and outside of your control, right? So the example of unhoused, um, if you live in a city that has a big food desert, which is common in a lot of cities, right? Sometimes the poorest areas are the areas that have the least access to really um, healthy food. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and most of our city is pretty good with groceries. But once you get out into the country, you get these food deserts where sometimes it's 30 miles to the closest Walmart that has a grocery store, and people are literally buying their food at like the dollar store, the Dollar Tree. And so that's a lot of canned packed goods. They're getting their calories. I'm not judging them. That's what's available to them. But that's a problem, right? So when we think about this group that we're trying to help, I think it's good for you to be aware of, okay, me bringing them more canned food is good, but also that's kind of putting a band-aid on a bigger issue, right? And I think part of what you can do is reflect on that. Okay, so research. I intentionally kept research last in these big four because a lot of students, I think, um, overestimate the importance of research. It does matter. I'm not trying to make a case that it doesn't, but not all med schools expect robust experience out of pre-meds. And when you look at med school mission, vision, values, they always talk about science and technology and breakthroughs and innovation. And of course, that's part of their mission. But often, what they're talking about is what their med students and professors are doing. They're not necessarily talking about that in terms of a pre medical requisite. And so, there are schools that are very research heavy, they're going to expect more. Um, so, I definitely encourage you to look into research. And from the students I've talked to who were able to get into med school without any research or without substantial research, the biggest piece of feedback they've given me when they're in med school is, well, I wish I had gotten some in undergrad because it matters so much for getting into residency. So some med schools care about research for pre-meds as part of the application, but not all. But almost all residencies do. So what you want to think about with research is this is sort of a long development arc. And again, depending on what schools you think you want to go to, how much of a research engaged physician you want to be, that's going to change your goals. It doesn't have to be clinical, because a lot of what matters for research, and again, remembering that you're not just saying, I did this thing, I got this many hours in a lab, but you're going to be writing essays about it, is, what was the whole scientific method? What was the hypothesis? What are you studying? What is the impact of the thing that you're studying going to be on society if this conclusion is proved true or false, right? if the study works out the way you think it will. And what I tend to see when I read rough drafts of research essays is a lot of, I learned to do PCR, I learned Western blots. Okay, great, right? I mean, those skills, that's cool. But when you talk about being a server at a restaurant, you don't spend a lot of time talking about, I learned how to like type in the stuff into the register, right? That's not the real point of being a server. The real point of being a server is being wicked good on your feet, being able to be cool under pressure, right? Being able to manage a lot of time management. It's the same with research, right? A lot of people focus on the skills instead of the big picture. So if you do research, it can be hard to get a meaningful activity. Sometimes you are just assigned to grudge bench work, cleaning beakers, take whatever opportunity you can get, but see how much you can learn about what you're really doing there so that you can really talk about the research overall and not just tiny little pieces of the day-to-day work with it. And then other activities, right? So I said big four. I do not have a slide for all of these pictures. I just sort of randomly picked a bunch of different things. You guys saw that list at the beginning. Employment counts. If you have to work, if you choose to work either for spending money or because you need it to pay the bills, that is a part of your time that is valuable. That can be an activity essay. It probably has given you a huge amount of development. Hobbies count. Things like poster presentations and conferences count. Things that have nothing to do with medicine, like, being a marathon runner or continuing to play the violin. All of that stuff can count in your activities essays. And I encourage you to think bigger than those big four, because being a pre-med is really hard. And somewhere in there, I hope that you really enjoy the big four, because if you don't like clinical, you're probably not going to like being a doctor. But it's okay to have stuff outside of your pre-med self. So keep carving out time to do what you need to do or what you love to do. And journal that also, because that stuff also counts as part of your development arc. And then again, same thing with this journaling. You're tracking what you've done, what you learned, what the impact was, what the dates and hours were. And sometimes for these activities, you're your own contact, right? If you're not in a running club, you just run on your own, that still counts. You don't have a contact, that's fine. We'll talk about that when you apply, but it's no big deal. And kind of the big point here as we come to the end of this giant activity session is just to remind you that all of this is about growth, right? We don't do clinical just to check a box. We do clinical, we do patient care to prove to ourselves that we like patient care. We do shadowing to see what the day in a life in a doctor is like and make sure that we haven't confused Grey's Anatomy BS with real physician work. We do community service because often being a doctor is about giving and giving and giving and not getting thanked and not getting accolades, and you need to find your own reward in giving. So these activities have purpose in helping you confirm to yourself that this is the right calling for you. So I promised a timeline, and I'm feeling okay now about our timeline for tonight because I feel like I can get through this in a few minutes and leave some time for questions. So as a reminder, I'm going to show you a 5-year timeline. You want to do 4, you want to do 6, whatever. You are smart people. You can adjust this. And this is just one example. It is not a mandate. But in this example, we're going to assume you're a freshman right now and that you're going to apply senior year and then start med school summer 2020-30. 2030, not 2020-30. That would be a long time away. Okay. So in year 1, you would take some of your prereqs and you might start taking some of English and writing is a premed, so you can see this is very prereq heavy course here with sciences, with labs. I didn't write with lab because I assume you know. And to me, a big thing about the first and maybe even your second year of undergrad is, while I do want you to start developing activities, I think the most important thing, especially the first term, is just make sure you've settled into what collegiate work is like. So slowly add in activities as you feel like you have a handle. But the big things that I think you can look to do this year are connect with your advisors, right? Make sure you've got your course plan all laid out. Start to connect with professors, right? So that you're starting to think about letters of rec and future relationships. Join a pre-health club, because that's going to be a way that gets you connected to other opportunities. And then I would say, if you can, and again, this includes summer, right? So some of this you might do in the school year, and some of you might do in the summer term. Start to explore some community service, start to get shadowing if you can. And as you start to get ready to do patient care work, see if you can decide what job is interesting to you and take a certification course to help you get that job. And of course, through all of this journal. So year 2, more prereqs. You're taking organic chem with lab, physics, taking stats. This is not a mandate, your sociology, Spanish. It's just an example of what you might do, right? So you're going to be taking some electives, basically. Continue to build a letter of relationships. This is where it can start to be useful to think about, as you get into upper level bio, is there someone who is either doing research that you really like, so you might be able to connect with them again later for that, or someone who maybe taught you in a really big course, but you know they also teach another higher level course that's smaller. So you might have a chance to see that professor a second time in a more intimate environment where you have a chance to build more of a relationship. I would hope that by now you've kind of figured out what your long-term community service activity is going to be. So if you've been doing kind of one-a-day events here and there, maybe by now you've found the one that really sparks your interest. Continuing to shadow if you're lucky enough to be able to shadow without clinical. And by now, I hope you are getting patient care experience. So year 3, this would be junior year in this example. By now, we're starting to get into a lot of upper level bio. And then I've got some just major / electives holding places for you for whatever major you pick or whatever general education requirements are necessary. You might see when you look at this list, there's a reason a lot of pre-meds are bio majors, right? I mean, some of it is genuinely a lot of you like bio, and that's cool. But also, by the time you've taken all the required courses and a bunch of the recommended courses, you're often a hair's breadth from a bio major anyway. So you do not have to be a bio major. You can be any major you want. Fun fact, humanities majors are the ones that do the best on the MCAT. Why? Because they have both the science and the reasoning muscle. But you pick the major that you like. So there's just some room there for that, and then continuing to work on all of your big activities. And then, so this is the senior year, year 4, right? A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to have a gap year. I'm going to get all my activities then. Nope, it's too late. Right? I mean, if you have multiple gap years, sure. But if you want to start med school a year after you graduate from college, then you are applying in senior year. So you're still continuing to take courses, but you can say, I don't have as much focus on it now. I'm recommending that you prepare for the MCAT in the fall, take it in January or February. And then that means that hopefully you have a lightish load spring semester, also probably fall semester to have room on MCAT, but spring semester, so you can start to really put time and energy into the application process. Writing your personal statement, it's like birthing. Like there's months of development before you push this thing out. There will be drafts upon drafts upon drafts. There will be long walks with headphones. There will be locking yourself into a room with caffeine, right? It takes a lot of soul searching to write a good personal statement. And what you'll find is a lot of your personal statement drafts, you have extra stuff that turns out to be activities essays. So that's kind of a bonus, right? When you write that original personal statement that's 20,000 characters instead of 5,000, that's not all a waste. A lot of the extra stuff is actually going to end up in other essays. But you've got roughly 18 activities essays to write, 15 for AMCAS plus 3 most meaningful. You can actually have more if you're doing DO or Texas. Sometimes you have other primary essays you need to write, just depending on your situation. And then another big thing that needs to happen in the spring is researching your med schools, right? And that takes a lot more time and energy than people tend to think, because you are really looking for fit. And although I tend to recommend writing secondaries a little bit later in the year, I recommend that you look at secondary questions as part of researching your med schools, because that actually tells you a lot about their values and what they're looking for and helps you assess. Um, so then things get really intense because you're doing all of this and you're probably graduating in May or June, depending on whether or not you're at a semester or quarter school. You're submitting your primary ideally in late May, early June, and then immediately going into pre-writing secondaries, even though secondaries aren't actually released for MD schools until late June, early July. Uh, Ideally, you've got all of your secondaries turned around within 2 weeks of receipt, and you get a big, if you're on the schedule I'm recommending, which is the ideal timeline, you are going to get tons of secondary essays right around the first day of July. And so to have them all turned around within 2 weeks, the only way you can get, if you have 80 of your 100 essays due by July 15th, the only way you're going to have that done is if you've been writing them in advance. The good news is most schools use the same secondary prompt year after year. Not 100%, but about 90%. So pre-writing is key. And then if you're doing it on the schedule I'm recommending, you can be invited sometimes to DO interviews as early as July, but MD interviews typically begin in August. And this is a cycle. This is an ideal timeline. You can go later than the one I'm doing, but this is the ideal timeline. It's what I put the students I work with personally through as much as we possibly can. It is a joy to work on this timeline because although it is very stressful and it's a lot, what it means is MD schools are allowed to start giving acceptances in October. And this is a very fun time of year for me because this is when my students who have been working hard and following my advice start getting their acceptances. Now you can continue to get acceptances all the way through March. You even can get acceptances in April or May or June if you're getting off wait lists. So the hardest part about year 5 is that you're mostly just waiting. You're waiting for that email or that phone call that's telling you you get an interview or you get an acceptance. There's not a lot going on this year other than interviews. But if you've done the timeline strategically the way I've laid out, you get acceptances earlier. So I have students who haven't necessarily gotten all the acceptances they want. Maybe one or two have heard from their dream school already, which is so great. But even if it's like, well, that is a school I like and I'm very happy, right? It's such a different mindset in October to be going, well, I know I'm going next year, I just don't know where, than to be biting your nails waiting on your interview. So you can have interviews. This is, I would say, the hardest part, anywhere from as early as August to up to March. That is a long, long waiting period. But whether you get your acceptance in October or in April or even in June because you got off a wait list, you're still in. And I'm putting July, August here very deliberately. A lot of people think med schools start in the fall. Very few actually start in September. It is common to have your white coat ceremony and your orientation in mid to late July or early August. So you really do start Med 1 in the summer. And that takes us to the end of our timeline, friends. I would like to know what questions you have.
Well, thank you so much for the very detailed explanations and very every year plan. So starting off with kind of some questions we had trickling in throughout the session is how are AP scores such as AP statistics seem as a course? Does that count for medical school or do I have to take it in college?
Oh, I love this question. So I'm sorry to tell you, it varies by med school. Some med schools accept all AP, some med schools accept none. Some med schools accept AP for certain subjects, but not others. Typically, if they say they don't accept AP, they will accept upper level coursework as a substitute. So, for example, if you took AP stats and then you have a med school that says, no, you still have to take stats, you probably don't want to retake intro to stats, but maybe you can take an upper level biostats. But unfortunately, it does. I do think it's actually kind of one of the great scams. I mean, AP sometimes works, but there's so much pressure on high school students to use it. And then very few grad schools in the health sciences actually accept AP. It's super annoying.
Yeah, I know one person that took the chemistry AP exam and went through the admission and everything, got the acceptance, and they told them that, oh, wait a minute, you need to take general chemistry. So this person had to like scramble
Ugh.
and have one semester before they could matriculate, and they couldn't get into that class, and so they basically didn't go to their top school. So, AP credits are great, but they they're not all equal. They're not all created equally at schools.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be that person that come back and says, oh, that one AP chemistry class that you took, um, so, and it's really stupid, but they could be choosy.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Next question we have says, I saw on the MSAR that most schools list you can take either calculus or statistics.
Yeah.
Am I incorrect in how I'm reading that? Are you all of the belief that taking calculus is a requirement?
Noel, what I'm doing here is trying to err on the side of conservatism. So some med schools will say we just need a semester or a year of math. We don't care what. Some will say they want one semester of calculus. A very few will say they want, oh, I'm coughing, 2 semesters of calculus. However, sometimes even if the med school doesn't require a year of calculus, your major or your upper level science courses do. So even, for example, if you take physics with algebra, which is usually okay for med schools, there are a few sticklers out there that want to see calculus-based physics. Sometimes you still have to take the year of calc. So I'm not saying it's a year or bust. I'm saying check and see if you need a year for whatever reason, so that you can plan early and not get caught, just like with the example Jubin gave a minute ago. I hope that helps
Yeah, I
clarify.
would just say that for most majors, STEM majors, you need to have a year of calculus. But if you're the outlier that's not a STEM major, s- again, it's just gonna it's kind of like saying you're going camping, and you're saying, okay, I'm gonna go camping for 10 days. And these are all the things that I need to have. Am I really gonna? I don't know. I could probably do without, I don't know, like extra fuel or whatever. But then when you get to that camping trip, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have this fuel, or I don't have this thing, and or you run out of food or something. And so most of the majors require, but I would just say that, and it's 160 schools, including the DO schools, and every single one of them have different requirements. And so, so do it you could probably get away with physics, taking physics without calculus, but I just think a lot of schools require calculus, and a lot of them actually and statistics is actually the one that you're going to clinically use the most anyways.
Yeah. It's complicated, Noel, but yeah, I agree with what you've been saying. This is just about planning and making sure
You want to be fully loaded.
Yes.
Perfect. And the next question we have is, can you apply to medical school without completing a bachelor's degree?
Apply, yes. Matriculate, no. Right? So almost all med schools want to see 90 hours of post-secondary education from a US or Canada institution. But yeah, there are lots of people who apply junior year.
And don't be that person that puts on everything and you don't get in that last class before you matriculate the summer before med school, because they will not let you in. So be like very strategic when you do that.
Especially because you start med school in the summer, right? I've had students say, like, oh, well, if I get into school that requires it, I'll just take it. I'm like, what if you get in May? Right?
Yep.
I mean, a lot of med schools have orientation the week after the 4th of July. You
Yep.
cannot plan on the summer before med school because you are in med school in the summer.
Yep.
Next question we have is, so if you took organic chemistry in your first year and withdrew later, but then finished it in your junior or senior year, will it be reflected in the application? Is it looked down upon?
Okay, good question. So will it be reflected in the application? Yes, because as part of the application, even though you have to request transcripts from every college and university you've ever been to, you then also have to enter every course you ever took in chronological order. It's so annoying. So yeah, they'll see that. They'll see that W. Is it looked down upon? One W, even a couple W's, is just not a big deal. Life happens. People get sick. COVID happens. Things, sometimes you're working a 30-hour-a-week job and you take 19 hours and you just realize you need 15. I do not sweat when students I'm working with have a W or two. What I don't want to see is a pattern where they don't seem to have learned from it, right? Because even if it's like one whole semester that's awash with W's, when I see that, I just assume something really major happened in their life. But if you see W's and retakes and then more W's and retakes, then that says to me that you're struggling to handle school and you're not learning from the problem. So yeah, one, don't worry.
Okay, the next question we have is, does retaking MCAT twice or 3 times looked down upon on medical school applications? Is there a super score?
There is not a super score. That is so important. This is different than SAT and I guess now ACT as well, right? Most med schools will honor the highest score, even if it's not the most recent. Ideally, you take it once and you're done. I do know people, lots of people, who have taken it twice and got into med school, and even some people who had to take it 3 times. But again, part of what you're trying to show med schools is that you're an adult who is resilient but also committed to learning. There's usually no good reason to take it 3 times. I mean, and I'm not trying to dismiss someone if you're in the room and you've done that, but typically when I see someone who's taken it 3 times, it means they took it once or twice without taking it seriously, right? Either they didn't take enough practice tests or they retook emotionally in a hurry, not allowing enough time to reassess. So I had said in that big red screen, what are pitfalls? Several full-length practice tests under time conditions. If you are not getting a score that you would be happy with on a timed full-length practice test under real testing conditions, then you're not ready to take the official.
Yeah, and don't be that person that gets a 512 and like, oh, I really want to get a higher one, and they take it again and they end up getting a 502.
Yeah.
That will look really bad because they will see both of them and they're like, okay, why is this person? So don't be that person to do that. So if you're gonna retake it, make sure you absolutely positively get a higher grade because they will see all your MCATs.
Yeah.
And we've had several deans that said that doesn't matter if you take it 2 or 3 times, make sure you're doing better every time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I think the lifetime you could take it 7. So just saying.
Yeah, you can. I don't recommend that you
Don't
do it.
recommend doing
You
it. Yeah.
can take it up to 7 times. Yeah.
Okay, this someone said, hi, you mentioned avoiding doing too much content review for the MCAT. Are there any tips you could share that would allow us to do this? I've been doing content review for about 3 months now, and I'm only halfway done.
Okay. Well, okay, so I think Decca, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly. You you might be fine, right? Because I had mentioned some people need 5 to 6 months. So it just probably means it's time for you to fold in practice if you haven't already. So it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It's time to shift gears. I don't know how you're prepping, if you have a course, a tutor, if you're doing DIY, get your hands on practice material. Obviously, the AAMC is the best source of practice material, and they have added some new stuff available in the last few months. So make sure you've got everything the AAMC offers. But often that's not enough, right? So buy some third-party exams as well. I'm a little biased because I was at Next Step when we were developing brand new MCATs for now it's a 10-year-old test, but there was a new MCAT in 2015 and I was part of that team. Now it's Blueprint, but they have 10 full lengths. You don't have to take them all as full lengths. You can use some of those full lengths just to do practice passages. But yeah, what I tend to recommend, and work with tutors, work with courses, but what I tend to recommend is start small and get bigger. So at first, just work on practice passages, right? And then you can graduate to practice time sections. And then eventually you can do some full length timed exams. And yeah, it is trial and error and reflecting. The In terms of taking practice tests, the number one mistake I see is not reviewing the test, right? So you take this exam, and then, I mean, that's a whole day's work, right? You're off for the rest of the day. But the next day, you need to pour over that thing. Don't just look at the number and go, oh no, or yay, right? Especially if you're using something like Blueprint or Kaplan or Altius, they have excellent score reports with detailed analysis. And you are not getting the maximum prep if you're just looking at the number at the top. You need to be pouring into the percentages by question type and by category and using that information to refine your ongoing prep.
Yeah, they're using the Jack Weston and WMC. That's fine. Those are great. Like Jack Weston, U World. Yeah.
Yeah, Jack's great. Yeah. Yeah. And he has great score reports too, right? So, and that's one thing the WMC kind of lacks, right? I mean, I still say use their source material, but I don't think their explanations are the greatest.
Our next question says, so can I be a volunteer EMT and it counts as clinical experience?
I think what you're asking me is, can unpaid work count as well as clinical? And yes, clinical can be paid or unpaid. So yeah, if you're an EMT, that's great clinical.
Perfect. Next question we have says, I'm currently a junior working as a CNA. I plan on doing my EMT training during the summer and will take the NREMT exam when I turn 18. Can I still add EMT as an extracurricular for undergrad admissions when the time comes? Or do I need a job that utilizes my EMT certificate?
Okay. So you will need a job that gets you clinical work. You can do EMT or CNA, those are both great, but the EMT cert alone does not count towards clinical hours for med school. And then if I'm reading this correctly, unless you're, I mean, I was 17 when I started college, but you're a junior, I think you're telling me you're a junior in high school.
I think so, yeah.
So just keep in
Because
mind that,
you could in some states you could be a CNA at 16,
yeah,
but you can't be an EMT until 18.
right. So first of all, that is amazing. I love that you're starting early. I hope you're enjoying the work. Great way to earn money and get experience. Unfortunately, med schools only really want to see activities that are post high school graduation. But that doesn't mean the CNA work you're doing isn't counting. You're still going to, it's still helping you develop and grow. It's probably still going to make you a better EMT because you have this prior experience. But when it comes to actually counting, tracking clinical hours and reporting them to med schools, that all starts after high school graduation.
I'll tell you this, if you're 16 and have CNA experience, by the time you're 22, you'll have like a lot more clinical experience, and
Mhm.
the what you did in high school would be an afterthought. So you'll find.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you're in great shape. So just keep it up.
Perfect. Next question. What sort of certifications should we be aiming for?
So it's going to depend on the job that you're interested in and also what state you're in. So we've been talking a lot about EMT. I am a huge fan of that because it's important work and it shows that you are not afraid of the grit and urgency of intense clinical work. But CNA is also great. Medical assistant is great. Phlebotomist is great. Um, you can be an OR tech or a surge tech. There's so many clinical jobs out there. Um, so what you may want to do, Avery, is just Google, get on Indeed or whatever. Is that what the kids use these days? Whatever job search tool people use, just type in like entry level patient care and see what a bunch of the jobs are and see what certifications are required, see what appeals to you.
So we did this whole talk on like various clinical experience things. Go watch that. Because also, I would just tell you this right now, as somebody who's an EMT, if you can't do well under stress, under a lot of those things, don't become an EMT. And again, it's one of those things that like knowing yourself, but also like if you put me in a clinic or anywhere that's a slow paced, I would like literally jump out of the window because I'm like I have like ADHD, and so I've only worked in the critical high stress places. So, and so make sure that you do what because you could say, well, yeah, I mean, Miss Grubbs thinks EMTs are great. I think EMTs are awesome, but that may not be right for you.
Exactly.
The other thing is there's doulas, there's like, so go watch that thing. There's all of these like, like, I mean, like we have somebody in our group who's really passionate about children. So she's done research at Boston Children. She is a court-appointed assist, she works at a neonatal clinic. She does like all of these different things that every single thing that you see in her application is around children, and she's demonstrated from advocacy to research to clinical experience. All of those things have been around kids. So, and this person is very committed to working with children. So, and God bless her. And so make sure like your personality meshes with those. If you don't like children, don't do things with, that are involved children or
Yeah. 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 You may have to explore a little, right? If you don't love your first clinical job, that's not a red flag. Find a different clinical job. If you don't enjoy clinical, reconsider your career, right?
right.
But, you know, I think sometimes people think of it as like, I don't have time for that, or that's so much. Like, that's going to be your whole life. So I
30 to
hope,
40 years, yeah.
yeah. So I hope that clinical is what motivates you, right? You come home from whatever it is, whether it's the EMT shift or, working with kids with cancer in a hospital, or I mean, whatever it is, that you come home thinking, this is why I struggle through OChem, right? Because this is what I want. Um, and so it may not be the first time, right? Because not all clinical jobs are the same, not all teams are the same. But ideally, you're finding something that really lights a fire under you.
It's like next question. So I'm trying to understand timeline. Usually medical school applications is due in August. Asking as I am planning to do my MCAT in spring, will it be late to submit score by then?
So later in the year, I believe we're going to do an application timeline, really deep dive. But if you go back and rewatch the recording and see the deck that I created, you'll see I recommend you submit your primary application in late May or early June for MD schools. And actually, DO opens a few weeks earlier, but you can also submit late May, early June. Um, AMCAS opens for applications. They let you start working on your application in early May, and you can submit typically the last Monday or Tuesday, usually somewhere around May 28th. I don't think you have to submit the first day it opens, but if you're being strategic about this and planning ahead, ideally you are submitting in that first week or two. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we have a lot more questions, so I'm not going to go super deep. Can you apply in August? Yes, you can, but you will be behind thousands of other applicants. And the thing about applying in this cycle that opens in May and goes until essentially October, that's when they, sometimes November, typically close submissions. Even for schools that say, oh, we don't do rolling acceptances, we're going to announce all our acceptances together in March, most of them actually start interviews in August. So if you apply in August, there are people who applied in May or June who already have their MCAT in, their SGT in, they have their primaries in, they have their secondaries in, their application is complete. They are eligible for August interviews, and no one's even looked at your app yet. So if the med school does, and again, it varies school to school, but if the med school does say 3 rounds of interviews, one in August, one in October, one in January, you may or may not have gotten to the top of the pile in time for October.
Yeah.
It's like musical chairs, but they keep taking a chair away. The later you submit, the fewer chances you have to be considered for an interview. So even in some schools, like I said, do rolling admissions. I have students who know right now where they're going to med school next year. Um,
Yeah, the person that's in our group, she's already been accepted to 2 medical schools.
yeah.
And this was like in late September. I've heard that some of the top schools have accepted 50% of their applicants by the end of September. So that
Yeah.
means they've interviewed people in August and September.
Yeah. And they will continue to do interviews, but sometimes they're doing interviews for waitlist positions.
Yep.
So med schools are required to fill their class. So they typically are going to accept, and again, it varies school to school, but from my conversations with directors of admissions, deans of admissions, they typically are going to look to interview about 2x the number of spaces that they have, right? So even if they've nearly filled the class, they may keep doing interviews just to have people on the wait list, because you can take, if you know, and you know, like Jube and I are talking about, we both know people who have multiple acceptances right now. They're allowed to hang on to those acceptances until the spring, and then in April they have to narrow down. So what tends to happen if you weren't lucky enough to get an acceptance somewhere in the fall, winter, early spring, is that in April, as students start to narrow down to their top choice, then waitlist spots become available. So yeah, if you apply in August, it's not the end of the world. It is not what I recommend. You know, if you can find a way to take the MCAT sooner or to work on your application at the same time as your MCAT, it's October. It's not necessarily too late to change your timeline. I do not recommend submitting a primary in August. That is not setting yourself up for success.
And it costs money too. You're burning through a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Because, yeah.
Perfect. What is your recommended ratio of time spent doing community service, clinical, shadowing versus studying and schooling?
Oh, this is such a good question.
It's a square root of I think the problem is that do what you think is important. Like, it's not like some formula. If it was a formula, then it would have just been like, okay, do 10 hours of community service, 10 hours of this, 10 hours, and that's it. Some people have done significantly more in one thing versus another. Um, and the schooling and the studying, that's all depends. Like, if it takes Steve 1 hour to learn something, it may take me 3 hours. He's smarter than me. So, like, we can't tell you that number. The other part of it, too, shadowing, like, if you're in a big city, you may have more opportunities than if you're in a rural area.
Yeah.
Clinical experience, the same thing. So it's kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Square root of
I
I.
guess the one thing I'll say is I think clinical carries more weight than shadowing. You know,
Yeah.
I've talked to students who have 100 hours of shadowing because they're lucky to have parents who are doctors and lots of friends, and then almost no clinical, and that is not exciting to me. Right? So get some shadowing, but be sure you get your clinical.
Okay, next question. So I've graduated high school 2 years early, therefore I will be applying to medical school right before I turn 18. How can I go about gaining clinical experience and applying according to this timeline? Do you have suggestions as what options I might have in this situation?
So, I think Fatima is how you say your name. You're a rare case, and I have worked with students like you, and I'm gonna just be honest, it is very challenging. Um, I mentioned before the matriculant survey, you can look at that. It is a very, very small percentage of students who get accepted to med school under the age of 20. You may be one of them, but it's very challenging because by law in many states, you have to be 18 to get clinical. Now, we talked about the fact that in some states you can start being a CNA as young as 16. So maybe you need to go look for a CNA opportunity, but it is really challenging. The other thing you could look at is hospice volunteering. Sometimes there's an age limit on that, sometimes there's not. Jubin had told me,
Yeah, I think it's 16. I think hospice is 16 as
and
well.
that's typically it's not always very robust medical work, right? It's a lot of companionship and bringing blankets and making sure they, take the meds that someone else has already set out for them, feeding them soup. But it does work on compassion and it gets you some exposure. So those are the two things I would say to look into. But I do just want to be real with you. Um, Sometimes there's this idea that, oh, being really young is going to give me prestige, and that's not really what med schools are looking for anymore. They want to see well-rounded, competent adults who have lived a lot of life. And so maybe you have, right? Because I don't think maturity is necessarily correlated to age. I know people in their 40s. Some of them are not as mature as people I know in their teens. But I just want you to know you're on a tough track, and you're still going to be accepted to do the work. They're not going to make an exception for you because of your age. So you're just going to have to figure it out. But good luck.
Next question. How many times can you apply to medical school?
One. No, you can apply more than one, but it costs, assuming you apply to
40
about,
schools.
yeah, that's going to be about 6,000 if you apply to 40 schools. And that's assuming that you don't have to fly anywhere for interviews. It'll go up drastically if you have to. These days, a lot of interviews are Zoom, but if you have to get on a plane and do lodging and hotel, it's going to go way, way up. If you apply to a mix of MD and DO, and you're lucky enough to get DO acceptances, their deposits are like $2,500, $3,000, where MD deposits are much more reasonable. They're usually in the 1 to 300 range. You don't want to apply more than once. There are a lot of people like me, and yeah, we cost money, and this isn't a sales pitch, but there are a lot of people like me and also people at schools who can help you assess your application. If you're not sure whether or not you should apply, you need to find an expert who will be kind to you, but also brutally honest if you need it, and have someone help you assess your application. I have never in my life told someone that they cannot be a doctor. I have had some tough conversations where I've had to say, this is not your year, you have more work to do. Find someone who will be honest with you about whether or not you're ready.
And some schools will tell you do not apply more than twice. They're like very much, they put it on their website. So after the second time, don't apply to that. I think USC is one of them.
Yeah. And when you apply twice, which does happen and is
Yep.
not necessarily a red flag, because sometimes really qualified people just don't find the right match or
Yeah.
misunderstand how to do the process. They're going to make you defend why you'd apply a second time. It's going to become an essay question in many cases. So you're going to have to answer for what you did differently. And so that's why I go back to, much like with MCAT, take the practice test, use that number. With applying, get the assessment, find someone who will tell you honestly what you're missing before you apply.
Next question. Would social justice slash equity work, parentheses, helping with voter registration, encouraging civic engagement, count as community service, including if it's a job?
I mean, it's definitely a great experience. There is a category called social justice and advocacy, right? And so a lot of times when we have experiences, they could list under things, right? If you have a paid job helping register voters, are you going to list it as employment? Are you going to list it as social justice and advocacy? I wouldn't list it as community service. In my mind, community service is, there's a problem and I want to go help give relief to the people experiencing the problem, versus social justice is, I want to get to the root of the problem and see if I can change it. But yeah, all that stuff is other than clinical, because people used to confuse clinical experience with shadowing, which is clinical observation. The categories don't matter a lot.
Next question. Is it worth to take a minor in arts or should I choose a minor in science like psychology?
You're going to be mad at me, Suchit, but, oh wait, Suchit. I'm sorry. I wish I knew how to say your name. There's no one right answer to this. It's whatever interests you and you want to do. There's not a credited response here.
Okay, next question. Since every score you get for the MCATs will be present in my application, if I get a score under 500 the first time, but for the second or even third trial, you get a higher score, would the first be an important impediment in my application?
I mean, maybe. Most med schools will honor the highest score, but they're going to wonder why you got the low score. They may ask you to defend it. And I'm going to go back to, I mean, maybe you've already done it, right? Maybe you're asking me this because you've got a 497 on your record. You usually do about the same as you do on the full length test. So, I mean, I understand sometimes you just have a bad test day. I mean, I've had students whose computers turned off in the middle of the test. Like, heaven forbid, right? But things happen. But what you want to do is avoid that by knowing you're going in prepped.
And the thing is, and this is the best example I ever heard where people say this, is that why they see all the scores, because it shows a level of maturity if you've taken the test. And if you keep on taking it and you're not like doing it better, it's just kind of like saying, well, I'm going to walk into this patient's room and I'm going to wing it. And, well, they may be mangled or whatever, but hey, at least the next patient's going to get my, or the second time I'll walk into the room. So so it's about maturity more than anything.
Yeah.
Everybody has a bad day, I would say you could get up in the morning and say, I'm gonna do great on the MCAT, and on my practice exams I'm getting 528, but then you wake up and your dog is dead, and somebody cuts you off, and you get hit in a car on the way, and then somebody else, whatever, you see a puppy die and you walk in and take the exam. I would say probably not take the exam that day, but
Yeah, avoid.
but things happen in life
Right.
and you have recourses. But some of you will be like, oh, I'm gonna take my exam that day after grandma died and everything, and then you do bad, and then you can't fix what's been broken. You could stop and say, okay, you know what, grandma died today, I'm not going to take the MCAT. I'm not going to go, and I'm going to burn through a couple $100. I'm going to avoid my exam in the middle of it or whatever. But then,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough love, but I completely agree. Right. And it works the same with high scores for the record as well. Right.
yeah,
Someone who got a 517 and they're like, oh, I just really wanted a 520. I'm like, get over
over
yourself.
it. Yep.
Move on. An MCAT does not get you into med school. It gets you into consideration, right? But I mean, I literally, and there's with the company I used to work for, there's a YouTube video you can watch about this. I literally met a student once who came to us for reapplication because he had a 528 and a 4.0, applied to 23 schools, got one interview, and zero acceptances. Right now, that's an extreme case, but you want to guess what was going on with his essays and activities? They did not show someone who was going to be a future doctor at that moment in time. I mean, maybe eventually he worked it out, but at that point, his numbers could not overcome the fact that he didn't have the experiences and maturity to be ready.
Next question. Is it okay to take bio, chem, or chem and physics at junior college instead of at an undergrad school, since medical school might ding you for not taking it at university? I
Yeah.
am taking for the cost purpose. Thanks.
I saw another question. Oh, it's right below with Marie. So this anonymous person and Marie asked really similar questions. So the short answer is you should be able to take your prereqs at a community college and be fine. You're transferring to a 4-year, you can take some upper level bio and other sciences there. Most schools are going to be fine with that. The longer answer is med school applications are a subjective process. And although I think it's going down, there are still, frankly, some snobs out there who question the worth of community college. Clearly, I'm here because I disagree with them, right? Like, I was so excited when I found this group that Jubin created because one of my big values is I think we need more physicians who don't come from insanely wealthy backgrounds, which is what the majority of our physicians are right now in America. So going to community college to save some money or to stay closer to home to me is a very smart strategic move. There are some med schools that have stigma about it. My attitude is if they have stigma about it, you didn't want to go there anyway. It's at least a little bit easier for me to say because I'm not the one hoping to get that acceptance. But I think as long as you can show that you can take some rigorous science at a 4-year university, I mean, get those prereqs done, right? I mean, you don't want to be taking them real late in your career. You need them before you take the MCAT. So you probably are going to do them in community college.
And we've had like 40 deans of admission. They know we're a community college group. So I would just say go back and see whichever dean has spoken, and those schools probably will accept them.
Yeah.
I would tell you this, there are some schools that will not accept community college, but I would say they're less than, the numbers on my hands.
Yeah.
So like this hand, just one hand.
Yeah.
So I would just say that there's only, so if you can take it at a JC because it's cheaper, closer to your house, housing, all of those different things, do it. You know, if you start at a community college, might as well take him and finish him there before you transfer.
Yep.
If you have a bachelor's degree, going back and doing it at a community college, and I'm actually working on writing something, but about doing a DIY post-bac and taking upper division classes
Yeah.
through a community college, and I'm going to write that up and post it. But ultimately, you're fine, and I would just say like we've like taken cuts from deans of admission and put them on shorts on social media that say yes, you could take your pre-med courses at community college, but we get that question every session, and I just kind of laugh at it. But it's a good question and ask it. But yeah, you're fine. The only caveat is if you, let's say you are a freshman and you start at a 4-year school like the UCs, UCI, UCLA, Ohio State, Michigan. While you're there, you're taking those prereq courses at a community college and not at the university that you're at. They will ask you why,
Yep.
and they would say, well, why did you do that? And so make sure you're not one of those people that does that. So
Yep.
because they're kind of like, well, wait a minute, plus the other part of it too is I don't get why you do that. Like I know somebody who did that. I'm like, so you're telling me you're taking like 20 some odd units, you're taking like 12 units at the university, and then you're taking these classes at the community college. It's like, why are you making life harder for yourself? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. The direction matters. Community college and then 4-year is generally accepted. But yeah, sorry, my clock talks. It was just telling me
yeah,
10. But
it's
yeah,
10 o'clock. Yeah,
especially for a
gosh.
retake, right? If you do a 4-year and then you try to retake it at community college, sometimes those optics are not great.
All right.
Another question, does a social job work, giving resources, helping with medication training and support for psych, patient care, like coordinator count as clinical?
You have to tell me, friend.
Yeah.
Not you, Stephen, the question asker. Um, you've got to use your own critical reasoning skills.
Yep.
Is this patient care, right? I'm not there, right? One sentence is not going to do it. If you think it's clinical, if you think you can make the case for it, then that's great. But just ask yourself, am I getting direct experience with patients in a way that's directly tied to their health?
So in my job, we have this title called patient navigators. And you're like, oh my God, like this is like, but all they do is their registration. They're the ER registration. They come in, take your name, make the chart, and take your insurance. And,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like, is that clinical experience? No, because you're doing you're doing the God Lord's work, because without
Yeah.
those people, we can't we can't order any test or do any charting or anything. So please, like I don't want to like undermine that. They're very important work, but
Yeah. And sometimes that's the way you get in, right? So you do that work for a while to prove yourself, to get a higher level job that you have a certification for. Um, so yeah, if all you can get is volunteering at the gift shop, take it, but don't confuse that with clinical.
yeah. Um, I should I retake prereqs if I got a C in them? I would ask why.
Yeah.
In some schools, you can't retake a C,
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah, C minus is not considered passing for a prereq for med school, but a C is. And so, yeah, I agree with Jubin. I don't think you necessarily need to. Even if, it's like, well, it's Gen Chem and I know I'm going to need it again later. Okay, but are there other ways you could close that gap? Um, and again, I think a lot of it is about learning from your mistakes and making sure that the next time you're struggling in a course, you get help earlier, so that even if you start with a C in OChem, that it turns into the B or the A.
Yeah, I would just say is why, and second is why did you get a C?
Yeah.
Like find out why you got a C, because if you got a C in Gen Chem, when you're gonna take OChem, get an A. You can't go change the past. Like,
Yeah.
And plus the other thing is most schools won't let you do that. Plus everybody's gonna see that C, and they're gonna say like this person can't make up. Like I know everybody wants to live in this perfect world, but like none of us are perfect. I mean, Steve is a little bit, but he has his bad days. But not everyone's perfect. You're gonna make mistakes. Like this whole process, Nobody's perfect. Everybody's gonna fail at something, and that's okay. But it's how you recover and how you show maturity and how you make yourself better, and not to get the next C, but get an A in the next class.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah.
Perfect. Another one says, I'm planning to apply next cycle. When is it a good time to start writing my personal statement while juggling everything else?
I typically recommend starting in January or February of the year you're going to apply. So primary applications open in May. Some kind of rough, that it's not polite, but the term I use is the puke draft, right? You just sit down and literally, I mean, I find a lot of pre-meds really struggle to put words on paper. So maybe use voice typing, right? Google Docs has it. You can just open it up, turn on the mic, and just start talking about why you want to be a doctor. Just
I,
get
I,
something down.
I would say spend your Christmas break
Hmm.
between going to grandma and other places thinking about it, but that's just me.
Yeah, that's similar timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I typically recommend January MCAT. So often they're spending that break with last minute MCAT prep. But yeah, somewhere around there. It's going to take several months. An important part of writing is space, right? This is also true with math and science, by the way. I was raised by a calculus teacher, and she used to say, if you're really stuck, write down anything and then look at it again in the morning, because your brain continues to work on these things. That's also true with writing. So part of the value in starting early is that you write a draft and then you walk away from it. And then you come back days, or if it's, especially if it's still winter, even maybe a week or two later, with fresh eyes and new thoughts. So you want space to reflect and break and return. um, I mean, can you churn something out in a couple days? Yeah, but it probably won't be as thoughtful and cogent and compelling as it would be if you give yourself that space for reflection and time and revision. Writing is rewriting. So there, you need to allow yourself a lot of space to rewrite. But good question.
Next question. I heard that high school dual enrollment shows up in your transcripts for medical school.
Yes.
If that class was a 2-semester STEM, like calculus, but I barely passed, what should I do to compensate?
Very similar answer, and I know you probably asked this before Jubin answered a minute ago, but similar to the C, you need to ask yourself why. What happened? Were you overloaded? Did you not care? That grade is there forever. The only thing you can do is get as many A's as you possibly can to show an upward trend, right? Because the truth is, a lot of people have some hiccups their first year of college, and that doesn't have to be the end of the world. But you need to show the med schools, not try to tell them, show them with your grades that you are a serious, committed scholastic person. And the only way you can do that is by figuring out what you did wrong and changing your behaviors.
And this is not to be cruel, and I'm not trying to be cruel, but saying that you were in high school and not serious, like that's not a really good one. But I just say that, immaturity and all those different things could be a reason for that. But if you go to college and you do well, I don't think it will be an issue. But I think, but if you continue that, then yeah, it will be a challenge. I would say more likely than not, you're taking a full load of high school classes, then you're going to community college and you're taking another set of classes, and with traveling and all of those other things that you do, it was just a little bit too much. And
Yep.
you probably struggle a little bit, but at least you know what it takes to do, to be in a college course. So that's, I guess the only thing you could take from this is knowing that how serious college is. And
Yeah.
so that's a learned experience.
Perfect. As we wrap up, we have 3 more left.
Okay.
I already have a bachelor's degree, but I was in a non-STEM major. So I'm going back and getting most of my prereqs. In my ideal timeline, I only get to take one elective class, like anatomy, before applying to schools. I know they are factoring in a lot of things, but how much do you think they weigh those elective classes for admissions? I was hoping I could take a few during the interview year just for knowledge.
Yeah, you absolutely can do that, Noelle. And keep in mind that when you apply and you list every course you've ever taken and the grade you got, you also list courses you plan to take up to matriculation. So you'll even be able to report that to med schools. And as Jubin mentioned earlier, just report honestly what you're actually going to have time to get done because they do check. Um, but I can't tell you how much weight because there are 213 med schools across the United States now, if you count all three application services, and maybe more now. Maybe we're up to 216. And each one has their own policies on requisites and recommended. Um, but often that upper level bio is recommended, not required. So just do what you can. I would rather you take a few courses and get A's than overload yourself and not really get the value of the course of the learning.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of elective. I think your whole bachelor could be considered an elective as a non-STEM major. So
Yeah.
I think you'll be fine. I think just do really well in your prereq classes and take like biochem and molecular biology upper division. You'll be fine.
Okay, and then next question. Sorry, I got confused on the MCAT starting semester. If I submitted my application on May, by the same year on October, I'll know my acceptances, question mark, meaning I'll start year one of spring of next year.
No.
You don't have it quite right. The application service opens in May for school that starts the next summer, like 15 months later, right? So right now, people who are in the application cycle currently, they want to start med school in 2026. They applied in May, June, maybe July of 2025, and acceptances are beginning to come out now in October. But there will be continuing interviews and acceptances all through the fall, winter, and early spring. So the longest window is the interview and acceptance cycle. And then so if you are lucky enough to get an acceptance in October, you're still starting med 1 in July or August of the next year. And if you get an acceptance in April, you're starting med 1 in July or August, right? So it's the same timeline.
Yeah, and I would tell you that you could get your admission to medical school. Let's say you want for 2020, you may get it as late as July 2026.
It absolutely happens. I
Yep.
knew someone a couple years ago, she's now a third year at OSU.
Mm.
She got off 2 different wait lists in the first week of July.
Yeah,
She'd already submitted her primaries and
for
was
the
working on her secondaries for her reapplication. And then amazingly was lucky enough to actually get off 2 wait lists within days of each other. So she was able to choose the school she wanted from those two.
I know someone, a friend who got got into medical school. She got into a couple, but she used to go to this one. Got an apartment, went down there, was gonna start that Monday, and I think that Thursday she got into the school that she really wanted to go to. She got off the wait list, and they started that Monday, so she like left everything, lost her deposit, and went to the school she really wanted to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's expensive when it's last minute, but it does
Yeah,
happen.
but she wanted to go to that school really bad, so.
Yeah, good for her.
Okay, nice. Thank you so much for your such a detailed answer. Will be for spring MCATs will be late for medical school application, but I couldn't find any spot earlier for MCATs till April. Please advise how I sign up early.
So April's not the end of the world, right? I did say January is ideal, but April is still okay because you'll have the score back in May. Um, but this always happens, right? So this is the first year that they've opened the entire testing cycle in October. They used to just do the first half of the year, but we always get a run on the early test dates. And then what happens is some people signed up aspirationally, and as the January, February, or March dates come along, they won't be ready. They'll either cancel or reschedule, and there will be new seats available. So it's a little bit like flying standby if you've ever done that. You keep your original one, and then there's a function on the WMC website where you can have them alert you if there are certain dates or locations you're looking for.
Yep.
And you can use it. But also, April doesn't have to be the end of the world. I'm assuming all of this anonymous attendee is the same person, and I think your original one you were talking about applying in August. That's my main concern,
Yeah, don't
right? The
apply
main
now.
thing about taking it in April is you can't do that and then work on apps. You're gonna have to do them concurrent.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Last question. Would volunteering at my church, taking care of the kids, be counted towards community service? I've been doing this for 3 years.
So, my opinion is no. Now, you can still count it as an experience if it's meaningful to you. I wouldn't call it community service because unless there's a special case with these kids that you haven't mentioned, it's not checking the bubble of looking around the world, seeing who's less privileged than you, and helping them. Right? So it's good work. I'm not saying it's not valuable. And if it means something to you, you can write an essay about it. But a lot of people confuse free labor with community service, and free labor is not the same as identifying people that you think have not as many resources and as advantages in you and doing something to help them.
This is the last two questions, so we're not going to take any more. This person wants to know they're getting their EMT this summer and start volunteering during school year. Can they include it in their application? Yes. Like, obviously, if you are applying, if you're submitting your application May 1st or May end of May, but you're not done with your EMT till August, you could say you're enrolled in EMT, but you can't say you've done like 2,000 hours of EMT work while your application is in the ether. And you can't, email med schools every week and saying, "Oh, this week I did 40 hours of EMT. Can you add that?" You can't do that. And most medical schools don't want updates because they don't have the staff, power to do this. And so, yeah, don't, so like you could say, yes, you're enrolled in an EMT course in the summer, but like if you're going to volunteer now, that's probably not going to be on your application.
Exactly.
Do you want to ask that last one?
Yeah, what advice do you have for getting into research?
So I would start with your science professors. That's a great place to start, especially if you're at a smaller school. Sometimes there's kind of a whole culture around getting into research opportunities with them. If you're lucky enough to be at a big state school, in Ohio State, or even if you're not, but there's one like that close to you, you don't have to research at your own university. Um, you do just have to start knocking on doors, right? Sending polite emails, making phone calls, which I mean, I'm Gen X and I hate making phone calls, but sometimes you just got to do it. um, and then also, it's okay if your research is with a private entity. So if you're lucky enough to live in a city where there are companies that do research, that's also a valid opportunity. So you want to think beyond, is there a research job posted at my pre-med honors department cork board, right? You may have to really go knock on some doors.
Yeah, and then this is one we think we did a couple of weeks ago, summer programs. There
Mm,
are these summer programs that will pay you to
yes.
do research full time.
Yeah.
And like you're knocking out like $400 of research there in 8 to 10 weeks. It's a
Yep.
full-time job. They're paying you like 20, $25 an hour.
Yep.
Those are great. And most people don't apply to them or the state passes. And we've brought NIH and a bunch of other entities that talk about these research programs. Um, and then what ends up happening is we get an email saying, "Oh, I missed the deadline. And can you like ask them if we could apply?" And it's like, dude, we don't have that kind of power. Uh, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, they're looking for summer people right now. So
yep.
I think a big way to get those opportunities is Instagram. If you are curating, you may have two different IGs. I mean, I do, but my pre-med Instagram is rife with research opportunities. So that's a great way to
Yeah,
connect.
we repost a lot of summer programs and a lot of things that they look for on our Instagram and and every single one of you have social media and if you're, spending time on, you know, uh, on those. We post them on our thing. Also, look at our past events. Somebody asked, can you put the link for the summer programs? Go back and look at some of our past programs. We have links on them.
Mhm.
And there's also an ruifinder.com that you could look at. But I'm going to ask you to do your own research instead of putting in links for you. So
Yeah.
but we have a lot. I mean, I think we post a lot of summer programs. I think like last year we posted something like 60 of them. So because we get hit up on them, we get people hit us up all the time because we have a big following and we post them. So anyways,
Okay,
no, you know what? We're gonna go because it's like 10:30 almost for Miss Grubbs in Ohio. So sorry, we wish we could ask him, but we can't make more questions. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Miss Grubbs, for making time for us. And
Oh, it was a pleasure.